The dun horse screamed a sound that tore through the late afternoon air like something dying and slammed its body against the corral rails. Wood splintered. The crowd pressed closer, men shouting encouragement, women gripping their shawls against the September heat that made everything shimmer. Above them, the Dakota Territory sky burned crimson as the sun dropped toward the western horizon. Takakota's world narrowed to the animal beneath him. Heaving muscle, the sharp stink of terror, sweat hooves hammering packed earth in a rhythm that rattled his teeth. His thighs screamed with the effort of holding on. His left hand twisted deep in the coarse mane knuckles bone white. His right hand clawed air, searching for balance that kept slipping away like water through his fingers. The horse spun hard left. Takakota shifted his weight just in time, using the momentum instead of fighting it. Then the animal reversed with vicious speed, a twist designed to break bone. Takakota slid forward along the creature's neck, his face pressed close enough to feel hot breath, and murmured words in Lakota, and the same words his grandmother had whispered to frightened animals when he was barely old enough to walk. The bucking slowed, stopped. The horse stood trembling sides, heaving like bellows, working a forge. Foam dripped from its muzzle. Takakota slid from its back boots, hitting earth, and stood breathing hard. Sweat carved clean tracks through the layer of alkali coating his face. He was 28 summers old, lean from prairie life, his black hair hanging loose past his shoulders. Scars marked his forearms, old burns from a fire. 5 winters passed. Knife cuts from fights survived the permanent record of violence endured. But it was his eyes that held the real story. Dark, watchful, haunted by things he tried not to remember. Enough of this foolishness. Old Winona called from the crowd, her voice sharp enough to cut stone. She was 70 winters, bent with age, but fierce as a wounded bear. A man your age should have taken a wife by now, Takakota. 2 wives would be better, and a house full of children to keep you from breaking your neck on half-wild animals. Laughter rippled through the watchers. A younger woman added, "At least then someone would mourn you properly when that horse finally wins." Takakota straightened, rolling his shoulders to ease the ache that lived permanently in his muscles. He looked at the faces around him, his people, the survivors. "I have the prairie," he said, speaking careful English, so the white traders at the crowd's edge would understand his meaning. "I need nothing else. A wife means opening doors I sealed shut for good reason." Near the gate, 2 white men sat their horses apart from the Lakota gathering. They wore trail clothes stained with alkali and old sweat-heavy gun belts slung low. The taller one had a drooping mustache yellowed from tobacco. The shorter man was thick through the chest, with small eyes that tracked Dakota like a hunter, sizing up game. That is the one Aldrich once watched. Mustache said, voice pitched low, but carrying in the still air. "Indians got sand." "I will grant him that," the thick one replied. He shifted in his saddle, and his pistol, a Colt Navy revolver with ivory grips, slipped from its holster. The gun hit, packed earth, and discharged with a flat crack that silenced everything. The bullet winded past Dakota's left shoulder, missing by inches, and chewed a fist-sized chunk from the post behind him. Splinters exploded outward. A woman screamed, horses reared. Men reached for weapons with the practice speed of those who had needed them before. Time stretched. Takakota stood motionless, his gaze locked on the 2 riders. He could see the smile forming on Mustache's face. The way Thick Chest made an elaborate show of dismounting to retrieve the fallen gun. "Blasted sorry about that," Thick Chest shouted, holding up the revolver. He forced a grin that showed too many teeth. Leathers worn clean through could have killed someone. No harm meant friend. Mustache joined the laughter, but it rang hollow as a cracked bell. Several Lakota men shifted hands, hovering near weapons, reading the threat beneath the performance. Dakota said nothing. He watched as the two riders mounted and turned their horses toward the road leading back to Vernon Aldrich's cattle empire. As they passed the corral, Mustache touched his hat brim. Dangerous work-breaking horses, he called. Man could get killed, especially a man folks say has been stirring up trouble with the water situation. Then they were gone. Hoof betats fading, a plume of alkali trailing behind, like a threat written in white. Old Winona gripped Dakota's forearm. Vernon Aldrich does not send his dogs to our gatherings for entertainment, she said in Lakota. This was a message. I know. Dakota looked at the splintered post at the bullet gouge, and I know what comes next. In his mind, unbidden, came the memory flames eating canvas lodges. Screams cutting through winter darkness, the smell of smoke and burning flesh. The raiders had come 5 years ago, men working for cattle barons who wanted the land cleared. Dakota had been hunting when they struck. He returned to find everyone gone, except his sister Ayana, who he pulled from a snowbank where she had hidden. He pushed the memory down deep where it could not him, and walked away. Behind him, the crowd dispersed slowly, but the taste of threat lingered like smoke on the tongue. Set up 6 mi west, where Diamond Creek had carved a shallow trench through sun-baked earth, Margaret Clean knelt in what remained of her garden and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. The bean plants had withered to brown sticks. The squash leaves curled inward like closing fists. She dug her fingers into soil that crumbled like ash, finding only powder too in down. She was 24 years old, though the territory had carved years into her face that had no business being there. Fine lines bracketed her blue eyes from constant squinting. Her hair, once bright as fresh wheat, had faded to the color of old rope. She wore a calico dress mended so many times the original pattern was barely visible, and men's work boots that had belonged to Thomas, her late husband, dead 8 months now, under circumstances that still made no sense. Thomas. The thought of him brought a familiar ache. She remembered the nightmare from 2 nights ago. Thomas riding toward her through flames, shouting something she could not hear, holding up a leather-bound book as if it held all the answers. She had woken, gasping, her heart hammering the image so vivid she could smell smoke. Mama, there is a snake. Margaret spun. Her son, Finn, stood 10 eft away, bare feet planted in cracked earth, pointing at a coiled shape near the well. 6 years old, sunburned and curious, showing no fear, which terrified her more than if he had screamed. Do not move, Margaret commanded, rising slowly. She grabbed the hoe, leaning against the fence, and approached with careful steps. The rattlesnake was thick as her wrist tail, buzzing a warning that set her teeth on edge. She brought the hoe down in one practice strike, severing the head from the body. The headless corpse thrashed violently. Finn watched with wide eyes. 4th one this month, Margaret muttered, flicking both pieces into the weeds with a hoe. Stay close to the house. Where is your sister? Inside, drawing pictures. Margaret walked to the well and dropped the bucket. The rope ran through her palms, rough hemp-burning skin, already raw, until it hit bottom with a hollow thud instead of a splash. Her chest tightened. She hauled the bucket back up. It came dripping with only mud clinging to the wood. No, not this. Not now. She dropped it again, praying for different results. The thud echoed up, mocking her hope. The well that had never failed that Thomas had spent 3 brutal weeks digging through rock and clay was going dry. Finn inside. Now stay with Liza. Do not come out until I say. The boy heard the barely controlled fear in her voice and obeyed without argument. Margaret followed the dry stream bed north, her mind churning through possibilities, each one darker than the last. An hour's hard walk brought her to the source of her nightmare made real. Someone had built a crude dam across the creek log stones and packed clay, diverting water into a new channel running west. The stolen water disappeared toward Vernon Aldrich's sprawling ranch. 3 men sat their horses on the far side of the dam, watching her approach with the lazy confidence of men who knew the law protected them. Margaret stopped at the dam's base. "You are stealing my water." The oldest rider, a leathery man with gray stubble and a Spencer rifle, shrugged. "Mr. Aldrich owns the upstream rights, Mrs. He is just exercising his legal claim. That is a lie. My husband held the original filing. The creek runs through my land under territorial agreement. Your husband's dead." The man spat tobacco juice that splattered near her boots. "And widows ain't got much standing in land court. Mr. Aldrich sent me to tell you he is willing to make a fair offer. Sell him the homestead at a reasonable price. Water flows again." Margaret's hands balled into fists, nails biting palms. "And if I refuse, then you learn to live without water." The man's smile showed gaps between brown teeth. "Of course, Mr. Aldrich mentioned another option. He is a widower, a woman, with your grit. He could use a wife. Marry him. Combined property's legal. Your troubles end." The other riders chuckled, a sound like stones in a barrel. Margaret turned and walked away, because if she stayed, she would say something that would get her shot. The men did not follow. The dam said everything they needed to say. By the time Margaret returned to the homestead, the sun was setting and her children were hungry. She fed them the last cornmeal mush, watered down to stretch further. Finn complained it tasted like paste. Liza, 4 years old and shy as a rabbit, ate without comment, her large brown eyes watching her mother's face for clues about how frightened she should be. That night after the children slept, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with a tallow candle and examined the only thing Thomas had left her that might hold value, a small leather journal she had found tucked beneath the floorboards near his side of the bed. She had discovered it a week after his death, marked with his handwriting, but written in a kind of shorthand she could not fully decipher. One entry dated 3 weeks before he died read, "Aldrich knows I kept records. If anything happens to me, the proof is in the old trunk. Must find it. The water agreement protects everyone, but only if she knows where to look." The words had made no sense then. Now, with the well dry and Aldrich's ultimatum hanging over her, they felt like a message from beyond the grave. The sound of hooves snapped her back to the present. Margaret grabbed Thomas's Henry rifle and checked the load with shaking hands. Through the window, she saw riders circling the house. 4, maybe 5 faces hidden in darkness. A shot cracked. The bullet punched through the door, sending splinters flying. Margaret dropped flat as more shots followed, tearing through walls, shattering the window above the sink. Root cellar. She hissed, crawling to the bed where Finn and Liza huddled. Now Finn grabbed his sister and half dragged her across the floor. Margaret covered them as they scrambled down the ladder into the earth and cellar. She followed, pulling the trapdoor shut as bullets continued to chew through the house above. In the darkness below, Liza whimpered. Finn held her tight, his small body shaking, but his arms steady. Margaret crouched on the ladder rifle, aimed at the trapdoor, counting her breaths, counting the seconds between shots. 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. Finally, the hoof-beats receded. Silence settled over the homestead like settling ash. Margaret waited another 10 minutes before climbing out. The house was destroyed. Curtains, shredded dishes, smashed furniture riddled with bullet holes. The barn door hung crooked, and hay bales lay slashed open. She stood in the doorway shaking not with fear, but with cold fury that felt like ice in her chest. "Mrs. Clean." Margaret spun, raising the rifle. A man stepped into moonlight, hands open at his sides. He wore buckskin leggings and a beaded shirt that gleamed faintly. His long black hair was tied back with red cloth. Behind him, 3 more figures on horseback waited. "I am Dakota," the man said in careful English. "My people water horses at your creek under the old agreement. We heard the shooting and came." Margaret kept the rifle level. "You are far from your camp, and you are alive because we were close." He gestured toward the road. "The riders ran when they saw us. One fell from his horse. We took his weapon." He held up a revolver with ivory grips, the same gun from the corral, then laid it on the fence post. "Evidence if you need it." Margaret studied him. Young, lean, with a scar along his jaw that spoke of violence, survived. His eyes were direct, unflinching. "Why help me?" Dakota looked at the bullet-riddled house. "Because men who fight women and children in darkness are worse than rabid dogs. And because the water matters to my people too. We both know who built that dam. Vernon Aldrich. Yes. He takes the water, makes your people and mine enemies. So we do not see the real thief." Dakota turned to leave, then paused. "If you need help, send word. My sister Ayanna knows the way to find us." He mounted in one fluid motion and rode off with his companions, shapes dissolving into shadow. Margaret stood holding the ivory-handled revolver and felt the first edge of an impossible plan begin to form. The next morning, she rode into Diamond Creek with both children squeezed behind her on the saddle. The town squatted in alkali false front buildings held together by commerce and whiskey. She tied her horse outside Doc Franklin Bale's clinic. Doc was past 50, whipped thin with exhausted eyes. He looked up from grinding medicine and immediately set down his work. "What happened?" Margaret told him everything. The dam, the ultimatum, the attack's intervention. Doc's face darkened with each sentence. "Vernon Aldrich is dangerous to cross," Doc said when she finished. "He owns half this county and controls the other half through debt." "I know. And Sheriff Briggs is preparing a warrant against the Lakota warrior who supposedly attacked Aldrich's men unprovoked. That revolver, Aldrich will call it stolen. Evidence of assault." Margaret's stomach dropped. "A warrant for Dakota." Doc nodded grimly. "Posted by noon. In this territory, that is enough to stretch a rope. He saved our lives. Try proving that in court." Doc leaned against the examination table. "Margaret, as a widow, you have almost no legal standing. The land office sides with whoever has the stronger claim. Right now, that is Aldrich." "Then I need to change my legal standing," Margaret said quietly. "How?" She met his eyes. "By getting a husband, inciting incident." Dakota was packing his camp when the white woman rode up with 2 children clinging to her. He set down his travo and waited, making no sudden moves. His cousin Red Otter muttered a warning. Ayanna stepped closer, hand on her knife. Margaret dismounted, leaving the children on the horse. "There is a warrant for your arrest. Aldrich claims you attacked his men." Dakota absorbed the news without reaction. "I stopped them from killing you. I know the law does not." She paused, gathering herself. "Aldrich also dammed the creek. My well is dry. He says he will restore water if I sell him my land or marry him." Red Otter spat. "So, you bring the white man's justice here?" "No." Margaret looked at Dakota. "I came to make an offer. Marry me." The silence stretched long enough for a hawk to cry and wheel away. Ayanna's hand tightened on her knife. Red Otter stared as if she had grown horns. "Explain," Dakota said finally. Margaret took a breath. "As a widow, I have no legal standing. A husband changes that. The property becomes ours jointly under territorial law. Aldrich cannot simply take it, and marriage complicates the warrant. You become a landowner, not just a drifter. They can hang without questions. You want me as your shield. I want a partnership built on mutual need. Margaret's gaze stayed steady. You need water access. I need protection. We both need Aldrich to lose. This is the only way I can see to make that happen. Dakota studied her. She was worn thin by work and grief, but steel showed beneath. She did not beg. She stated terms. And when Aldrich is gone, when the water flows again. Margaret hesitated. We figure that out when we are not dying. Ayanna spoke rapidly in Lakota, her tone sharp. Dakota answered, then switched to English. My sister says this is a trap that you will use me then call the soldiers when you no longer need me. Your sister is right to be suspicious. Margaret replied, I am asking you to risk everything on my word. All I can tell you is that my word is all I have left. I will not break it. Takakota looked at the children on the horse. The boy watched with open curiosity. The girl hid her face. They are yours. Yes. Finn and Liza. And if I refuse? Margaret's jaw tightened. Then I lose my land. Aldrich takes the water. Your people go thirsty. And I am forced into a marriage I would rather die than accept. She paused. And you spend your life running from a warrant for a crime that was not a crime. Takakota walked to the edge of camp, where land opened into prairie. Memory rose unbidden flames, screams his grandmother's voice, cutting off mid-prayer as a bullet found her. He had sworn never to tie himself to the white world again. But the dam was real. The warrant was real. This woman with 2 frightened children was real. He turned back. I want shelter, not a wife. If we do this, it is for the law and the land, nothing more. Margaret nodded slowly. You want a wife or just shelter? Shelter, Dakota repeated. For all of us, then we agree. Red Otter walked away cursing. Ayanna said something sharp that made Dakota flinch, but she stayed. Margaret remounted and started toward the road. Tomorrow morning, the courthouse in Diamond Creek. Bring witnesses if you trust any. Then she was gone. Alkali swirling behind her. Ayanna moved to Dakota's side. You are a fool, she said in English. This will destroy you. Maybe, Dakota admitted, but doing nothing destroys her, and eventually us. She is not your responsibility. No, but the water is. And if Aldrich wins, he uses it to choke everyone within 50 me. We fight now or die slowly later. Ayanna sedayed. If you do this foolish thing, I will come as witness. Someone needs to watch the white woman's promises. First obstacle, the ride into Diamond Creek. The next morning felt like riding toward a noose. Takakota came with Ayanna Red Otter and 2 elders. All were armed but kept weapons hidden. Margaret met them on the courthouse steps, children at her sides. She wore the same mended dress, but had pinned up her hair and scrubbed her face clean. She looked young and scared and determined. The crowd had gathered. Word had spread like prairie fire. Men leaned against posts, watching with cold eyes. Women whispered. A boy threw a rock that clattered near Liza's feet. The little girl jumped, but did not cry. Keep moving, Margaret said quietly. She took Liza's cold hand and climbed the steps. Takakota followed, feeling every stare like a physical weight. Inside, Judge Horace Fenton sat behind a battered desk, looking deeply unhappy. He was round with gray mutton chops and a nose mapped with broken veins. Sheriff Walter Briggs stood in the corner, hand on his gun belt, sweat beading his forehead. This is highly irregular, Fenton said, shuffling papers. A union between a white woman and a Lakota man is not prohibited by territorial law, but it is unprecedented here. Unprecedented is not illegal, Margaret said. Fenton sighed. No, it is not. He looked at her. Do you, Margaret Ann Klein, widow of Thomas Klein, enter this union of your own free will? I do. And you, Dakota of the Lakota people? I do. Then by the authority granted to me, I pronounce you legally wed. May you find whatever you are looking for. Fenton signed the certificate with angry strokes. Now leave before someone tests this union's legality with a rope. They left quickly. On the street, Vernon Aldrich stood watching from the saloon boardwalk. He was broad-shouldered middle-50s, with iron-gray hair and a face like weathered granite. He wore good clothes, black coat, white shirt, silver tie clasp, and carried himself like a man who owned everything visible. Mrs. Dakota, he said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Congratulations on your bold choice. Stay away from my land, Margaret said without stopping. Aldrich's smile widened. Your land is surrounded by mine, and the law here has a long memory for Indians who step out of line. He looked at Dakota. Ask around about what happened to the last band that tried to claim permanent rights to Diamond Creek. Oh, wait, you cannot. They all burned. Dakota's hand moved toward his knife. Ayanna gripped his arm hard. Red Otter stepped between them and Aldrich's men. Keep walking, Margaret said quietly. He wants you to start something where he has witnesses. They kept moving behind them. Aldrich's laughter followed like a curse. The ride home took them through a narrow aoyo where red rock walls pressed close. They were halfway through when Margaret's horse suddenly shied ears flat. Dakota saw the warning. A shot cracked. The bullet sparked off stone inches from Margaret's head. Her horse reared. Finn clung to the saddle. Liisa screamed. Riders appeared on the ridges, 6 of them faces, hidden rifles glinting. Go! Dakota shouted. Margaret snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels bouncing over stones. Shots cracked from above bullets, winding off rock, kicking up red plumes. Red Otter returned fire, his Sharp's carbine booming. One attacker jerked and fell backward. Ayanna sent arrows hissing upward. One shattered a rifle stock. The passage narrowed. Wheels scraped rock on both sides, throwing sparks. Dakota stood in the wagon bed, firing carefully. One shot knocked a hat off. Another splintered wood near an attacker's head. The wagon hit a rock and lurched violently. Margaret's weight shifted. She started sliding out of the seat hands, losing grip. Dakota dropped his rifle and grabbed her elbow with both hands, hauling her back with brutal force that would leave bruises. For one heartbeat, they were face to face, so close she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, feel his breath on her cheek. His hands still gripped her arm. Then the moment broke. Margaret straightened, grabbed the reins, and drove clear. Behind them, the ambushers pulled back, unwilling to ride into accurate fire. They reached the homestead, breathing hard. Children tumbled out, shaken, but unharmed. Red Otter checked horses. Ayanna scanned for pursuit. Dakota and Margaret stood by the wagon, not quite looking at each other. Margaret's arm tingled where he had grabbed her. Thank you, she said finally. We are married now, Dakota replied carefully. What happens to you happens to me. That is the agreement. It was not tenderness, it was fact. But something in the way he said it made Margaret's chest tighten with an emotion she did not have words for. Rising action. Doc Beale came 2 days later examining bullet holes. Aldrich is escalating. You humiliated him publicly. I married to protect my children. Margaret said to him, It is the same. Doc looked at Dakota repairing the windmill. Now that Indian has legal standing, Aldrich cannot simply hang him without questions. That makes him more dangerous. What will he do? Manufacture a crime serious enough the law has no choice. Doc set down his cup. Be very careful. That night, Nellie Harper rode out despite danger. She was thin, serious, in her 30s, teaching the few children whose families could afford schooling. I came to warn you. Aldrich was drunk in the saloon, boasting. He told a gambler that once he owns the creek, and well, you will crawl to him begging. She looked at Dakota, and he said, "The Indian will swing by harvest time, no matter what paper says." Let him talk, Dakota said. He is not just talking. Nellie pulled out a folded paper. A bounty notice. $500 for information leading to your arrest on charges of cattle theft and assault. The description was accurate enough to be deadly. $500 was more than most men saw in 2 years. After Nellie left, Margaret confronted Dakota. Leave now. You could disappear and leave you and your children to face this alone. He shook his head. I gave my word. Your word might kill you. Then I die keeping it. He looked at her. You think I do not know what I risked? I have been hunted before. I have lost everything before, but I will not lose by running. Margaret recognized the look in his eyes, the same she saw in her mirror every morning. Someone with nothing left to lose but self-respect. Then we fight, she said. Yes, we fight. Over the next week, Dakota transformed the homestead into something defensible. He dug trenches, set, sharpened stakes, cached water, and sealed barrels, taught Finn to reload quickly, and showed Liza hiding spots. One evening, Margaret brought him water. He drank, handed back the cup. Their fingers brushed calloused skin against work-roughened palm. The touch lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary. Your son asks many questions, Dakota observed. He has not had a man to teach him since Thomas died. He is brave for someone so young. Margaret smiled faintly. He thinks you are the bravest man alive. After you grabbed him, well, he draws pictures of you on every scrap of paper. Something in Dakota's face softened slightly. That night, Aldrich's men came again. This time they cut fences and drove Margaret's cattle 15 head, everything she owned, north toward Aldrich's range. That is theft, Margaret said, voice shaking with fury. Yes, and when we report it, Aldrich claims they wandered. He wants us to ride onto his land so he can call it trespassing. Dakota looked at the cut wires. We are being pushed into a trap. The trap tightened daily. A freighter refused to sell Margaret supplies. The blacksmith turned Dakota away. Even the general store found reasons to deny credit. They are afraid, Doc explained. Aldrich let it be known that anyone helping you is his enemy. His interests keep this town alive, Margaret told Dakota that evening. Then we need allies who are not afraid. I will ask my people to help, Dakota said. But it means asking them to risk themselves for a white woman's land. I'm not asking. I already decided. If we lose, Aldrich uses water to control everyone, white and Lakota. My elders need to understand. He returned next day with Ayanna and 3 elders. One gray sky with white braided hair spoke with Dakota in Lakota, then turned to Margaret. My nephew says you are honest, Gray Sky said in accented English. He says you fight for water belonging to everyone. I fight to keep my children alive. Margaret said, if that helps your people, I am glad, but I will not prettify it. This is desperation. Gray Sky face creased into something like respect. Honesty is rare. We will watch the dam. If Aldrich's men strengthen it or cut more water, we will know. But we cannot fight his riders openly. The soldiers would come. Any help is more than I had yesterday, Margaret said. After the men left, Ayanna stayed. She waited until Dakota was in the barn, then approached Margaret. You asked my brother to risk everything, Ayanna said bluntly. Do you understand what that means? Yes. Do you? Ayana's eyes were hard. He lost his first family to men like Aldrich, white men who burned our winter camp because we would not leave land they wanted. I pulled him from the ashes. I watched him become someone who trusts no one. She stepped closer. If you betray him, use him, then cast him aside, I will make you regret it. Margaret met her gaze. I have 2 children depending on me. I do not make promises I cannot keep, because broken promises mean dead children. I promised to code a partnership. That is what he will have. Ayana studied her, then gave a curt nod. Good, because he will die before breaking his word to you. I would prefer he not die at all. The tension broke in blood a week later. Margaret was in the barn when Liza screamed pure terror that turned her blood to ice. She ran outside to see cattle flooding across the pasture like a brown avalanche driven by riders cracking whips. The animals were panicked, running blind horns tossing. Directly in their path stood Finn, frozen with fear. Margaret screamed his name. Finn turned, saw the wall of cattle went white. His legs would not move. Dakota came from the side. At full gallop, his horse stretched flat. Foam flew from its mouth. He leaned from the saddle, one arm, outstretched weight precariously balanced. He grabbed Finn's shirt just as the stampede reached them. The motion nearly tore Dakota from the saddle. His shoulders screamed something in the joints stretched beyond limits. Finn's weight swung wild legs, dangling inches above churning hooves. A longhorn steer veered close. Its horn caught Dakota's thigh, slicing through buckskin and muscle. Blood welled hot, soaking his leggings. Pain exploded white-hot through his leg. He hauled Finn across the saddle in front of him with strength born of desperation and spurred clear. The cattle thundered past, destroying fences, trampling the garden, leaving the pasture churned to mud. Aldrich riders circled on the far side, laughing, then rode off. Dakota dismounted and nearly collapsed as his wounded leg buckled. Finn clung to him, sobbing. Margaret ran to them, Liza on her hip, and caught Dakota before he fell. "You are bleeding," she said, voice tight. "I will live." Dakota looked at Finn. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, unable to speak through tears. "Good. You are alive. That matters." Dakota gripped the boy's shoulder, leaving bloody prints on his shirt. "You froze. That happens to everyone first time. Next time you will move." "I am sorry," Finn choked out. "You have nothing to apologize for. Aldrich's men are at fault." Dakota swayed, face gray. Margaret got her shoulder under his arm and helped him toward the house, his weight heavy against her side, his blood soaking into her dress. Doc came that night and stitched Dakota's thigh by lamplight. The wound was deep, and the horn having carved through muscle nearly to bone. Doc worked silently while Margaret held the lamp, and Ayana gripped her brother's hand. Dakota's jaw clenched, but he made no sound. "This is escalating," Doc said, tying off the final stitch. "Aldrich is actively provoking a response that will justify destroying you completely." "Then we give him no response," Margaret said. "You might not have a choice much longer." After Doc left, Margaret sat with Dakota in the kitchen, his wounded leg propped on a chair. He had refused whiskey for pain, saying he needed his mind clear. "You saved my son's life today," Margaret said quietly. "He is a child in an adult's war. Any decent man would have done the same. No, most would have calculated risk and stayed clear." She looked at his bandaged leg, blood already soaking through. "You could have been killed." Dakota met her eyes. So could he, and he had no choice being there. "I did." The weight of those words shifted something between them. This was no longer just shelter and legal protection. It was becoming something they had no words for, something that frightened them. because it meant vulnerability in a world that punished vulnerability. Later, unable to sleep, Margaret checked on the children and found Dakota already there sitting beside their bed, despite his wounded leg watching them sleep. "Liza called me Papa earlier," he said softly. "When I put her to bed, she said, 'Good night, Papa.' Like it was natural," I heard Margaret said quietly. "I did not know if I should correct her. I did not correct her either." Dakota looked at Margaret, confusion in his eyes. "I do not know if that was right." Margaret moved beside him. "I do not think there is right or wrong here. We are building something with no map." They stood in darkness, listening to children breathe. And for a moment, the world outside seemed far away. Midpoint twist. The accusation came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a settler named Jeb Worthy, who stumbled into Diamond Creek's main street, shouting about murder and savages. He had found 6 dead cattle on the boundary between Aldrich's range and Lakota hunting grounds. The animals lay in a neat row, throats cut with precision brands carved away. Beside the corpses, a broken war lance with Lakota markings and a torn moccasin showing bloodstains. By midday, the story had spread through Diamond Creek like cholera. The Lakota had butchered Aldrich stock. They were preparing for war. The evidence was plain. Aldrich rode into town by afternoon, his face a mask of fury. He carried the broken lance and moccasin, holding them high as he addressed the growing crowd from his saddle. "This is how they repay hospitality," he shouted. "We let them water horses on our land, treat them with Christian mercy, and they murder our cattle like savages." The crowd murmured, anger building. Someone shouted, "The Indians should be driven out." Another called for the army to burn the camps. Dakota, who had ridden to town attempting to trade for medical supplies, stepped into the street despite his wounded leg. "That is a lie," he said clearly. "My people did not touch your cattle." "Then explain this." Aldrich thrust the lance toward him. "Explain the moccasin. Anyone can plant evidence. You want an excuse to break the water agreement and drive us from the land. You need a crime to justify your theft." The crowd shifted, uncertain. Some faces showed doubt. Then a shot cracked from the press of bodies. A man near the edge screamed and went down, blood spreading across his leg. People scattered shouting. Dakota saw the victim, a well-dressed stranger with spectacles and a leather document case spilling papers marked with federal seals. Sheriff Briggs pushed through chaos, face pale. "That is Lucian Hart, the federal land agent sent by Washington to investigate water rights." He turned to Dakota. "Did you shoot him?" No, Dakota had not even drawn his weapon. But the crowd saw a federal agent bleeding and a Lakota warrior standing over him. Voices rose calling for rope, demanding immediate justice. Aldrich stood aside, face carefully neutral, eyes gleaming. Briggs stepped between Dakota and the mob. "Nobody hangs without trial," he said, voice shaking. "I am taking him into custody for his own protection." Dakota could have fought, could have run, but either choice condemned Margaret and her children. So he unbuckled his rifle, handed it to Briggs, and allowed himself to be walked to jail. While the crowd followed, baying for blood, Margaret heard the news from Nellie and rode to the homestead in a panic. She tore through Thomas's old trunk papers, letters, bills, searching desperately. Then, wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom, her fingers found a folded map and leather-bound ledger. She spread the map on the table. It showed Diamond Creek with property boundaries marked in Thomas's handwriting. Shared water rights agreement with Lakota Band and adjacent homesteaders, witnessed and enforced by Vernon Aldrich. March 14th, 1869. The ledger held business transactions in Thomas's careful hand. She found entries from 10 years earlier, signed by both Thomas Clean and Vernon Aldrich. The language was formal, All parties with legal claims along Diamond Creek were entitled to water access. No dam or diversion without written consent of all stakeholders. But the next pages held something darker. Scrolled notes Thomas's writing, but hurried frantic, described a raid on a Lakota winter camp. December 1873, 5 years ago, Aldrich had organized it, needing the tribe taught respect. Thomas had written with the raiders. The notes made that horrifyingly clear, but they showed his growing horror. Women and children burned alive, elders shot, fleeing systematic destruction of everything the band owned. The final entry dated a week after I cannot live with this sin. Leaving Aldrich's employ, claiming homestead land by Diamond Creek under my legal right if he comes for me. The entry ended abruptly, incared as if written in haste. Margaret's hands shook. Then she found another entry. This one dated 8 months ago, 3 weeks before Thomas's death. Aldrich knows I kept records. He came yesterday, demanded the ledger. I refused. He said, "Accidents happen to men who cannot keep their mouth shut. I'm afraid. If anything happens, M must find the proof. It is the only thing that can stop him." Ice flooded Margaret's veins. Thomas had not died in a riding accident. Aldrich had killed him. Her late husband, the man she loved, father of her children, had been murdered to silence him. And now Aldrich was trying to eliminate everyone else who might know the truth. A sound at the door made her spin. Ayanna stood there, breathing hard. "They have Dakota," Ayanna said urgently. "The mob is building a gallows. They say they will use it tonight, trial or no trial." "I found proof," Margaret said, holding up the ledger with shaking hands. "Aldrich orchestrated the raid that killed your people. He signed a water agreement he is now trying to destroy." And her voice broke slightly. "He killed my husband to keep him silent." Ayanna's eyes widened. "This can save Dakota if we get it to the federal agent and keep them both alive long enough to testify." Margaret grabbed her coat. "Where is Hart now?" "Doc's clinic under guard." "Then we go now." They rode hard through falling darkness. But when they reached the clinic, hope turned to ash. The door hung crooked. Glass lay scattered. Inside the clinic was wrecked cabinets, overturned medicines, spilled papers scattered. Doc sat against the wall cloth, pressed to his split lip. His left eye was swelling shut, blood dripping from his nose. "They came an hour ago," Doc rasped. "Aldrich's riders. 6 of them masked, took Hart right from the bed, barely conscious. Said witnesses belong to the cattlemen now." He gestured weakly. "And they took a Lakota girl, your cousin Winona Ayanna. She was outside keeping watch." Margaret felt the world tilt. "Where?" "North toward the dam. North toward Aldrich's stronghold, where he could control everything." Ayanna stood rigid with fury. "We go get them." "How?" Margaret demanded. "Dakota is in jail. We are 2 women. Aldrich has a dozen riders." Margaret looked at the ledger. "We get Dakota out. Then we ride for the dam with proof that we'll hang Aldrich if we can get it in front of the right people. Second obstacle." They rode first to the jail. Margaret showed Briggs the ledger, explaining the water rights and the notes about the raid and about Thomas's murder. Briggs read slowly, face going from pale to gray. "If this is real, if Aldrich murdered Thomas clean and organized that massacre, the governor of the territory will have to act. But only if we get Hart to verify and sign a statement, and only if Aldrich does not destroy the evidence first." "Then give me back my husband," Margaret said flatly. Briggs stared at her. Then he pulled out keys with shaking hands. "I am finished with Vernon Aldrich. This is me paying one debt to my conscience." He opened the cell. Dakota emerged. "You believe us now?" "I believe I have been a coward," Briggs said quietly. Maybe this makes me slightly less damned. He handed Dakota a rifle. This does not make us square. Nothing can. But maybe it helps. They rode north. Margaret, Dakota, Ayanna, Briggs, Doc, refusing to stay behind, and 3 Lakota warriors who had been watching the jail. Not an army, but enough to chase truth into light. Following tracks, they pushed toward the canyon. On the trail, they found a dropped glove Ayanna identified as Winona's and a blood smear on rock. The path narrowed as it climbed. Steep walls rose on both sides. Aldrich's men held the high ground. Halfway up, riders appeared on ridges and opened fire. Bullets sparked off stone. Briggs took a grazing hit to the shoulder that spun him in the saddle. He cursed, gripping the wound, blood welling between fingers. Doc fired back with a shotgun, the blast scattering attackers. They pulled back around a bend, horses dancing. They are pinning us down, Ayanna said. Dakota studied the canyon walls. There is another path, a goat trail my people used before white men came. It climbs the side canyon and comes out above the dam. Dangerous one misstep, and you fall 200 FT, but it bypasses the ambush. Can you find it in the dark? Margaret asked. The sun was setting. I can find it. Dakota led them to a crack in the canyon wall that looked like shadow. The path beyond was barely wide enough for a man on foot. They had to dismount and lead horses by hand, moving single file with the canyon dropping away into darkness. Margaret's boots slipped on loose shale. She caught herself hard-hammering. Behind her, a Lakota warrior murmured a prayer. Ahead, Dakota moved with confidence, though she saw tension in his shoulders. They climbed for what felt like hours. The trail switch backed up the face, sometimes so narrow they pressed against rock and inched sideways. Margaret tried not to look down. When she did, she saw only blackness pulling at her like a living thing. Finally, the trail leveled. They were above the main canyon, looking down at the dam from a position Aldrich would never expect. Below the dam came into view timber and stone, wedged across the creek's throat. Water pressed against it, making everything groan. Torches burned along the top, and there stood Vernon Aldrich. Beside him, Lucian Hart lashed upright to a post, barely conscious, wounded leg, bandaged but bleeding. Winona knelt nearby, hands, bound bruised, darkening her face. 2 guards stood watch. Aldrich was gesturing toward wooden crates stacked near the center. Dynamite, Dakota said quietly. He will blow his own damn flood. The Lakota camps blame it on sabotage. Everyone who knows the truth dies. Then we stop him, Margaret said. Now they descended fast, half sliding down, loose slope. By the time they reached the dam's base, Aldrich had spotted them and was shouting orders. The final battle had begun. Climax. Margaret's group hit the dam base at full gallop. Briggs and Doc took position behind boulders, rifles barking. The Lakota warriors spread out using every bit of cover, arrows and shots, forcing Aldrich's men to keep down. But the dam was the real battlefield. Dakota dismounted while moving and scrambled up water-soaked logs. Margaret followed Boots, slipping hands, grabbing for purchase. The structure groaned water pressure, making everything shift. Rain started cold driving, rain turning everything slick. Aldrich stood near the dynamite crate's pistol in one hand, matches in the other. He saw Dakota climbing and aimed carefully, waiting for a clear shot. You should have let me buy her out, Aldrich shouted over water's roar. Would have saved everyone pain. You wanted to erase your crimes, Dakota shouted back, still climbing. You burned my people to steal land. You killed Thomas Clean when he tried to make it right. But we have proof. The ledger, the signed agreement. You have already lost. Nobody will believe a savage and a desperate widow. Aldrich's voice cracked with rage, veins standing out on his neck. "You are nothing. When this dam breaks and floods those camps, I will own this valley." Margaret hauled herself onto the dam's top, soaked through, and pulled the oilcloth-wrapped ledger from her coat. She held it high. "I have your handwriting. Thomas kept records, every signature, every date, the raid, the water agreement, the truth about how you murdered him." Aldrich's eyes went wide, genuine shock, as if he never considered Thomas might have kept evidence. Then fury twisted his face. "Give me that!" He lunged, grabbing Margaret's arm, dragging her toward the edge where water turned white and deadly. The pistol dug into her ribs. "Drop the rifle, Indian, or the widow goes over now." Dakota froze, rifle raised, but shot blocked. "Let her go. Take me instead. I am who you want dead." The offer jolted Aldrich. His grip loosened. Margaret slammed the heavy ledger into his wrist. Bone cracked. The pistol flew spinning through air, skidding toward the dynamite crates. Aldrich roared. Seeing control evaporating, he shoved Margaret toward the spillway. Dakota caught her before she fell, pulling her back. Aldrich, seeing everything slipping away, snarled and reached into his coat. He pulled out a tin of lucifer matches, struck one on a post, and deliberately touched flame to the fuse. The fuse caught instantly. Orange spark hissing toward explosives, eating hemp at terrifying speed despite rain. "You want proof?" Aldrich screamed. "There will not be any when this canyon floods." He turned to run, clutching a strong box of gold escape insurance. The box was heavy, slowing him, but greed would not let him release it. Ayanna kicked the guard behind her, his rifle shot going wild. She rolled, slamming the second guard off the dam into churning water. His scream cut off abruptly. The fuse burned 20 FT-15. Dakota sprinted toward it, grabbed the burning end. It scorched his fingers, treated with chemicals that made it burn despite rain. He pulled hard. The dynamite blew. Not all of it. Rain and Dakota's yanking had separated the fuse from most charges, but two bundles detonated with force that turned the world white and loud and violent. The explosion ripped through the dam's face, blowing logs and stones outward like shrapnel. The shock wave picked Dakota up and slammed him into a beam hard enough to crack ribs. His vision went white. He could not breathe. He slid toward the shattered edge, clawing for handhold, finding nothing. Water surged through the gap like a battering ram. A floating log smashed into Dakota, rolling him closer to the torn edge. He grabbed a broken post, got fingers around it for half a second, lost grip as another surge hit. He went over. Margaret saw him fall and felt her heart stop. She abandoned Hart's ropes and sprinted back across the shaking dam. Behind her, Ayanna had cut Winona free and was dragging the girl towards solid ground. Dakota surfaced 20 FT downstream, gasping, trying to swim. His wounded leg was not working. The current was too strong. It pulled him toward churning water over submerged rocks that would crush him. Margaret reached the wagon, grabbed the longest fence rail, looped a lariat around one end, threw it toward Dakota with all her strength. The first throw fell short. Dakota swept past arms, flailing, going under before fighting back to surface. His face was gray. Blood from his reopened wound darkened water around him. Again, Ayanna shouted, appearing at Margaret's side. Together they hauled rope back, coiled it through again. This time Dakota's fingers hooked the rail. He gripped with both hands, knuckles white. The rope jerked taut, nearly pulling them off their feet. Doc and a warrior grabbed the rope from behind. They hauled hand over hand, inch by brutal inch. Current fought for every foot. Dakota's weight felt like hauling a boulder uphill. Margaret's hands burned where hemp tore through palms. She did not care. She pulled until arms screamed and back felt ready to break. Takakota came up slowly, face-bone white. His hand gripped the solid edge. Ayana grabbed his shirt. Margaret grabbed his arm. Together, they dragged him onto trembling planks where he collapsed, coughing muddy water and blood. "Breathe," Margaret commanded, hands on his face, tilting his head so water could drain. "Breathe, Takakota. Stay with me." He coughed, choked, dragged in a ragged breath. Then another, his eyes focused on her face. Children, safe at home with Red Otter. Margaret's hands shook so hard she could barely hold him. "You are alive. That is what matters." Aldrich, meanwhile, tried to escape, but the collapsing dam shifted beneath his feet. He ran across planking no longer supported, merely floating on surface tension. The strong box dragged at his arms. He should have dropped it. Any sane man would have. But greed clouded judgment. He clutched it tighter. A massive surge hit. The planks lifted, twisted, collapsed. Aldrich screamed as footing vanished. He fell into churning current, still clutching the strong box. Gold's weight pulled him under immediately. He surfaced once 20 yards downstream, arms flailing. "Help!" he screamed somebody. The current took him over a drop where creek tumbled down jagged rocks. His scream cut off with terrible finality. No one saw him surface again. No one tried to rescue him. Falling action. The partial destruction sent water roaring back into Diamond Creek's original channel. The surge washed out some Lakota lodges too close to banks. 3 horses were lost, but scouts had warned camps, and everyone survived by moving to higher ground. Over following days, Margaret's well slowly filled. She dropped the bucket one morning, a week later, and heard it splash. The sound made her cry. Great gasping sobs she could not control. Finn found her sitting by the well, tears streaming, rope clutched in her hands. He sat beside her without speaking until she was ready to stand. Lucian Hart survived thanks to Doc and Winona's nursing. The girl refused to leave his side, bringing water and broth, changing bandages with surprising gentleness. Once Hart could sit upright and hold a pen, he took detailed statements from Margaret Takakota, Ayana Briggs, and witnesses who found courage after Aldrich's death. The ledger and map, water-damaged but legible, became federal evidence. Hart wrote a 40-page report, so detailed and damning it could not be ignored. He sent it by courier to the governor of the territory, along with a personal letter recommending immediate action. Within a month, telegrams arrived from Washington. The governor of the territory ordered full investigation of Aldrich's dealings. His holdings acquired through intimidation, fraud, and violence were seized. His men scattered. Water rights along Diamond Creek were officially confirmed, with Margaret Klein Dakota's name and Takakota's name listed as joint holders, the first such document in Dakota Territory, granting equal ownership to white settler and Lakota individual in Diamond Creek. Opinions shifted slowly. Some settlers still muttered about that Indian and refused to meet Margaret's eyes. A few families pulled children from Nellie's school when she welcomed Lakota students, but others began to see differently. They had watched Takakota risk his life to save a white child, heard about his role stopping Aldrich and rescuing a federal agent, seen Margaret and Takakota stand together when anyone sensible would have run. One afternoon, Vernon Blackjack Aldrich's former foreman, one of the riders who raided Margaret's homestead, rode up leading cattle. "These belong to Aldrich," Blackjack said, looking uncomfortable. "Reckon they belong to the government now, but nobody's claiming them. Figured you could use stock more than they can." He paused, twisting his hat. "I am sorry for my part. Aldrich had a hold on me. Debt fear of being blacklisted. Not an excuse, just truth. Now he is gone. I'm trying to do better." Margaret studied him. Apologies are easy. Actions are harder. You want to make this right? Help rebuild fences your people tore down. Blackjack nodded. Fair. I will be back tomorrow with tools and lumber. He kept his word. Over weeks, he and other former Aldrich writers worked alongside Lakota neighbors and poor settlers repairing damage. Not friendship, not yet, but a start towards something better. Nellie expanded her schoolhouse, adding a second room. Lakota children sat beside settler kids. First week saw fights and name-calling. By month's end, Finn was teaching a Lakota boy named Swift Otter to read English, and Swift Otter was teaching Finn to track deer. Liza made friends with Winona's younger sister, and the two played with cornhusk dolls under cottonwoods. Doc found himself busier than ever, treating both communities. His hair went grayer shoulders, more bent, but he hired 2 ravens, a young Lakota healer as assistant, and kept working. Briggs ran for re-election, promising to uphold law without fear or favor. He won narrowly, mostly because enough people remembered he had in the end stood against Aldrich when it mattered. At the homestead, life settled into new rhythm. Dakota's leg healed slowly, leaving a permanent scar and slight limp that bothered him on cold mornings. He repaired the barn, properly, replaced rotted boards, raised the roof. He dug irrigation ditches to carry creek water to fields. Margaret planted a new garden. This time beans grew tall and squash sprawled across rich earth. She added a chicken coop. Liza named all 6 hens and treated them like pets. Finn followed Dakota everywhere, learning to track gentle horses, shoot bow and rifle. The boy grew taller, laughter ringing across prairie. Liza, still shy but growing braver, began speaking more freely. She told elaborate stories about chickens and drew pictures of horses that actually looked like horses. When she scraped her knee or had nightmares, she ran to Dakota as readily as Margaret, calling him Papa without hesitation. One evening in late autumn, with first frost silvering grass and sky painted orange and purple, Margaret stood by the fence watching Dakota show Finn how to stack firewood properly. The lesson was practical, unglamorous, absolutely necessary. Ayanna appeared at her side. The 2 women had developed careful friendship built on respect and shared survival. He is good with your children, Ayanna observed. They are his children now too, Margaret replied. Whether we planned it or not, Ayanna was silent watching her brother. When our camp burned, I thought he would never trust anyone again, never let anyone close. He built walls so high I thought they could never come down. What changed? Ayanna smiled faintly. You and those 2 loud, curious, terrifying children who treat him like he is the most important person in the world. She paused. He is happy. I have not seen him happy in 5 years. I did not think I would ever see it again. Margaret felt warmth spread through her chest. Not the desperate heat of crisis, but something gentler and more enduring. That night after children slept, Margaret and Dakota sat on the porch, watching stars wheel overhead. In the distance, campfires glowed where the Lakota band had set lodges along Restored Creek. Farther off, Diamond Creek's lights flickered. 2 worlds learning slowly and painfully to exist beside each other. Do you think it will last? Margaret asked. This peace? No, Dakota said honestly. There will be more men like Aldrich, more fights over land and water. The government will keep pushing us onto smaller reservations. White settlers will keep coming. Conflicts are not over. Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural. Dakota's arms settled around her. But we made a crack in the wall, he continued. We showed it is possible for a white woman and Lakota man to stand together and win against someone who thought himself untouchable. Others can widen that crack. I hope you are right. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the windmill turn and prairie grass whisper. Inside, Lhasa murmured in sleep. Finn's bed creaked as he rolled over. "Margaret," Dakota said finally, voice careful, "I want to ask something." She lifted her head. "What?" "When we married, I said I wanted shelter. Just shelter, nothing more. I told myself that was enough, that I did not need or want anything deeper." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I was wrong or lying to myself." Margaret's heart beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that somewhere between the ambush and the dam, and watching you fight like a warrior for your children, somewhere in all that this stopped being shelter." He turned to face her fully. In starlight she could see vulnerability and fear and hope. "This became home, and you became more than a partner in legal arrangement." Tears pricked Margaret's eyes. "You became more than shelter to me, too. I just did not know how to say it. I was afraid you would feel trapped." "I am afraid," Dakota admitted. "Afraid of losing this. Losing you, the children, this fragile thing we built. Because I know how quickly everything can burn." He took her hand, calloused fingers lacing through hers. "But I am more afraid of never trying, of walking away from something real, because I was too much of a coward to risk my heart." Margaret kissed him, not sudden or dramatic, slow and deliberate, a choice made with full knowledge. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle despite roughness. When they pulled apart, both trembled slightly. "I do not know how to do this," Dakota said quietly. "Be a husband, be a father. I only know how to survive." "Then we learn together," Margaret replied. "The same way we learn to fight together." He kissed her forehead, tenderness that still felt new, but was growing natural. Together he agreed, resolution and final surprise. 3 months later, winter settled over Dakota Territory with snow-blanketing prairie and temperatures that bit like living things. The homestead weathered it well. Barn was tight and warm, house rechanked gaps filled so wind could not howl through. Root cellar stocked with vegetables, smoked meat, enough supplies to see them through to spring. Lucy and Hart returned in early December, riding a sturdy bay and wearing a heavy wool coat. He carried a leather portfolio and wore the satisfied expression of someone who had accomplished something significant. He found Margaret and Dakota in the barn, repairing harness by lantern light. Finn helped small hands struggling with heavy leather. Liza sat on a hay bale, watching and asking questions about everything. "I have something for you," Lucian said, setting the portfolio on a workbench. He pulled out a document thick with seals, ribbon signatures, a revised homestead patent approved by the governor of the territory, and countersigned by Interior Department in Washington. Margaret wiped her hands and took it carefully. She read slowly, lips moving over unfamiliar legal language. Then she stopped, breath-catching. "What?" Dakota asked, moving beside her. Margaret's finger traced a line near bottom. "It lists both our names, Margaret Klein Takakota and Takakota of the Lakota people, joint owners." "Read the next part," Lucian prompted, smiling. Margaret continued aloud. "In recognition of shared stewardship and mutual defense of common resources, the undersigned parties hold equal and irrevocable and perpetual claim to Diamond Creek allotment to be passed to heirs without restriction based on race origin or tribal affiliation. This claim shall stand as precedent within this territory for future that the said parties are jointly seized in fee simple agreements between citizens of European descent and members of the several Indian nations recognized within the United States." She looked up, stunned. "This changes everything." Lucian nodded. "First such document in Dakota Territory, possibly any Western territory. If it holds in court, which I believe it will give in evidence and circumstances. It fundamentally changes how law treats land ownership in mixed marriages. You are legal partners in fullest sense, with rights that cannot easily be challenged. Dakota stared at the document. His name in formal script sat beside Margaret's. The law that once hunted him now protected him. How? He asked quietly. I wrote a very detailed report, Lucien said with a slight smile. And I had help from territorial representatives horrified by what Aldrich did. The governor of the territory saw opportunity to make history and improve relations with indigenous peoples, at least symbolically. So he pushed it through. His smile faded. It will not solve everything. There will be legal challenges, people who hate this precedent within this territory and work to overturn it. But for now it stands, and it is yours. After Lucien left, Margaret and Dakota stood in the barn holding the document like it might dissolve. This changes things, Dakota said. Yes. Margaret looked at him. This man who started as desperate stranger and had become center of her world in ways she still did not fully understand. We are not just surviving anymore. We are building something that will last. Dakota folded the document with careful reverence and placed it in the wooden box where Thomas's papers had lived. The past cleared away, making room for a future they were creating together. Do you still want shelter? Margaret asked softly, echoing the question that started everything. Or something more. Dakota looked at the house visible through barn door lamplight glowing in windows, smoke rising from chimney children's shadows moving inside. I stopped wanting just shelter long ago, he said. I was afraid to admit it. Afraid if I let myself want more, I would lose everything again. And now I want everything, Dakota admitted. The children, the land, you, this life we fought so hard to build. I want to wake up every morning knowing I am not alone. Margaret stepped into his arms, and he held her close chin resting on top of her head. Then you will have it, she said. All of it, for as long as we both live. Spring came early. By March, snow melted, and Diamond Creek ran high with snow melt. Margaret planted expanded garden. Dakota built proper chicken coop. Finn turned 7 tall enough to reach the top pantry shelf. Liza turned 5 and announced she wanted to learn to read. The homestead thrived. Word of their joint patent spread through territory. Several other mixed families, white settlers married to Lakota, or Arapjo or Cheyenne, began filing similar claims, using Margaret and Dakota's precedent within this territory as legal justification. Not all succeeded. Some faced violent opposition, but the crack had widened. More light was coming through. One evening in late April, as prairie bloomed with wildflowers and air smelled of sage and possibility, Dakota received visitors. Gray Sky and 2 elders rode to the homestead and asked to speak with him. They sat on the porch, passing a pipe speaking Lakota, for nearly an hour. When they left, Dakota looked troubled. Margaret, who had been in the garden with children, sat beside him. What did they want? They offered me a place on the Council of Elders, Dakota said slowly. It is an honor. They want me to return to the band, take leadership role, help guide our people through difficult years coming. Margaret's chest tightened. That is important. Yes, everything I thought I wanted when younger. Respect, position, voice in decisions shaping our future. He paused. But it would mean leaving here, leaving you and the children, spending most of my time with the band, traveling to councils, living the life I had before. Margaret forced herself to speak calmly. You should take it if it is what you want. Dakota looked at her, searching her face. Is that what you want? For me to leave? No, Margaret admitted, voice breaking slightly. But I will not trap you here out of obligation. My people are here, Dakota said quietly. He took her hand. You, Finn, Liza, the life we built, that is where I belong now. But the offer, I turned it down. Dakota interrupted gently. I told Grace Sky, I am honored, but my place is here with my family. He squeezed her hand. I spent 5 years alone, trusting no one, believing I needed no one. I was wrong. I do need people. I need you. And I choose you freely and without regret. Tears spilled despite her efforts. Are you certain I do not want you to wake in 10 years and resent me? The only thing I would resent is losing what we have now. Dakota brushed tears from her cheeks. I made my choice, Margaret. You are my choice every day for the rest of my life. She kissed him, tasting salt and sunshine and hope. When they broke apart, Finn stood in the doorway grinning. Does this mean you are staying forever? Dakota smiled, genuine warm, transforming his serious face. Yes, I'm staying forever. Good, Finn said with 7-year-old certainty. We need you. Who else would teach me to track rabbits? Liza appeared behind him, clutching the wooden horse Dakota had carved. You are my papa, she said firmly. You cannot leave. Dakota looked at Margaret, wonder in his eyes. Wonder of a man who lost everything and somehow found something better. That summer, railroad surveyors came offering substantial payment for land and water rights. Margaret listened politely, then declined. The land was not for sale at any price. The homestead became a gathering place. Nellie brought students for lessons about farming. Doc stopped by regularly. Gray Sky and elders visited to discuss water management, treating Margaret and Dakota as equals. Blackjack brought his wife and son to Sunday dinners. Adults talked carefully about weather and crops, avoiding violent past, but slowly building something like friendship. One evening in late summer, as sun set painting prairie gold in red and purple, the family gathered by the fence. Dakota held Liza on his shoulders while she pointed at birds overhead. Finn stood beside Margaret, practicing Lakota words. Margaret leaned against the fence, hand resting on Dakota's arm, and felt something she thought lost. Forever contentment. I have been thinking, Margaret said quietly. About what? About how this started. You asked me what I wanted, a wife or just shelter. She smiled. I told you shelter, but that was never really true. What I wanted was hope, a reason to keep fighting, a future for my children that was not just surviving day to day. And now I have more than I dreamed possible. Margaret looked at him, at their children, at the homestead they defended with blood and stubborn refusal to surrender. I have home, partner. Family stronger than anything the world can throw at us. Dakota shifted Liza to one arm and put the other around Margaret. We built this together. Every part, the land, the house, the family. It belongs to both of us equally. Finn looked up. Are you going to kiss again? Because every time you do, Liza giggles. Liza on cue giggled. Margaret laughed. Pure joy ringing across prairie. Yes, Finn. We probably will. You should get used to it. She kissed Dakota by the fence as sun set and windmill turned and Diamond Creek flowed strong through land belonging to them both. Finn made a face. Liisa giggled harder, and Dakota smiled against Margaret's lips, feeling lighter than he had in 5 years. But the story was not quite finished. 2 weeks later, on a bright morning, when Margaret was hanging laundry, a rider appeared on the horizon. As he drew closer, she recognized Lucian Hart, his leg fully healed, riding with purpose. I have news, Lucian said, dismounting. And a question for you both. Dakota emerged from the barn, wiping his hands. What kind of news? The governor of the territory is establishing a new water commission to handle disputes. He wants representatives from different communities, white settlers, Lakota leaders, other tribes. Lucian looked at them. He specifically requested you both to testify about shared stewardship and serve as advisors. It would mean traveling to Yankton twice a year for meetings. Margaret and Dakota exchanged glances. Why us? Margaret asked. Because you proved it can work, Lucian said simply. White and Lakota together. The governor of the territory wants to replicate your model elsewhere. He thinks if you tell your story, show people it is possible. It might prevent future conflicts, or make us targets, Dakota said quietly. Possibly, Lucian admitted. There are still men who would rather see everything stay as it was. But there are also men and women who want something better. You showed them a path forward. Margaret looked at Dakota. What do you think? I think we did not fight this hard just to hide what we learned. He turned to Lucian. We will do it on one condition. Our children's safety is guaranteed. We will not leave them vulnerable. Already arranged. Lucian said, when you travel, Doc and Nellie have agreed to stay at the homestead as guardians, and Sheriff Briggs promised personal protection. After Lucian left, Margaret and Dakota stood together watching their children play. Finn was teaching Liza to throw a lasso, both of them laughing when the rope tangled. Are we doing the right thing? Margaret asked. I do not know, Dakota said honestly. But I know we cannot build a better future by staying silent. If our story can help even one other family avoid what we went through, it is worth the risk. Margaret took his hand. Then we do it together. Always together. Years later, 4 of them on a bright October morning, Margaret stood by the fence watching a different scene. Finn, now 11 and nearly her height, taught Swift and 2 other Lakota boys to repair Saddle's hands, moving with confidence Dakota had taught him. Liza, 9, and no longer shy, raced her pony against Winona, both girls shrieking with laughter. The homestead had grown. A second barn house expanded with additional room. Fences stretched farther, enclosing fields producing wheat, corn, hay. Cattle herd quadrupled. But the most important changes were not physical. Diamond Creek now flowed through land shared by 3 families. Margaret and Dakota's homestead, Gray Sky's extended band, and a young settler couple named the Harrises, who had married despite one being white and one being Arab Joe. Water agreement held. Disputes were settled through council, not violence. In town, Nellie's school taught 40 students mixed heritage and backgrounds. Doc had trained 2 ravens so well, the young healer handled half the medical calls alone. Briggs had been re-elected twice, slowly earning back respect lost during Aldrich years. It was not paradise. There were still men who muttered about half-breeds and Indian lovers. Government was pressuring more Lakota bands onto distant reservations. Conflicts erupted over land and resources. But in this corner of Dakota Territory, a small group had proven another way was possible. Margaret felt arms circle her waist from behind. She leaned back against Dakota's chest. What are you thinking? He asked about how far we have come, how close we came to losing everything. But we did not lose it, Dakota reminded her. We fought for it, and we won. Margaret turned in his arms. His hair was longer, threaded with gray at temples. The scar on his thighs still pained him before storms, but his eyes were warmer than the day they met, less haunted, more at peace. I love you, Margaret said. She had not said it enough in early years, both too scarred and cautious, but she said it now freely. I love you, Dakota. I love the life we built. I love the man you have become, the father, the partner, the friend. Dakota cupped her face, calloused palms gentle. I love you, Margaret. I loved you when I was too afraid to admit it. I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die. He kissed her deep and slow, speaking of years of trust and shared struggle and nights holding each other against darkness. When they broke apart, Both children were watching from across the yard. "They are kissing again," Liza announced to the world. "We know," Finn called back, grinning. "They do that all the time now." Takakota laughed a sound that still surprised Margaret with its warmth and frequency. "Come on," Margaret said, taking his hand. "We have work before winter. Fence repairs hay to stack 100 things that will not wait." "Always work," Takakota agreed, smiling. "But good work, work that means something." They walked toward the house, hand in hand, children's voices ringing across Prairie Windmill, turning steady in autumn breeze. Behind them, Diamond Creek flowed clear and strong water shared freely by all who needed it, the way it should have been from the beginning. The land that nearly killed them had become their salvation. The marriage that started as desperate strategy had become foundation of everything they valued. And the future, once dark and hopeless, now stretched ahead, bright with possibility. What began with a question, "You want a wife, or just shelter?" had been answered not with words, but with years of choices made daily. Hands held tight through storms and struggle. Love that grew from rocky soil of survival into something strong enough to last. They had their answer. Shelter had been the door. Love was what they built inside. And that love, tested by fire, water, violence, and hatred, had proven stronger than anything the world could.